Hello, and in this video I'm going to look at the Part 2 topic, Describe a person who speaks a foreign language well. You should say who this person is, what language they know, what he or she uses the language for, and explain why you think he or she learnt it well. Now I'm going to speak about somebody who speaks Korean well. If you are Korean and think, oh no, I can't use this, you can just pretend the person you know is not Korean and they have learnt Korean in order to do the things that I explain in the video. But obviously you can adapt this and change it to another language, whatever you want. But hopefully I'll give you some vocabulary in the video that will help you to talk about any language. And at the end, I'll look at one Part 3 question connected to this topic. Okay, so the person I'm going to talk about is called Amy. She's one of my closest friends, and we've known each other since primary school. We met in year 1, but we didn't actually become friends until year 3. Anyway, when we were studying in high school, she wasn't into languages at all and hated studying French, so I've always felt she wasn't a natural linguist. I was the opposite. I found French relatively easy and was able to pick it up quite quickly. About 2 years ago, Amy started to get into K-pop, and although she couldn't understand a word, she loved the music. Through listening to Korean music, she then discovered K-dramas, and she quickly became addicted to them. These two things sparked an interest in the Korean language, and she was inspired to try to learn Korean. She picked up the odd word just through watching, but she knew she needed to put some effort into learning it properly. It is an exceedingly difficult language because you need to learn a new alphabet, and I expected her to give up, but she mastered it really quickly. She watched loads of YouTube videos and bought a textbook to help her with the basics. Every spare minute she had her head in that book. I'll be honest, I thought it was a fad and she would quickly get bored and quit, but she stuck at it, which really impressed me. Now, 2 years later, she is fluent in Korean. When I say fluent, obviously she doesn't know every single word, but she can communicate with Koreans. She still uses subtitles when watching K-dramas because it helps her to expand her vocabulary, but she can understand the gist without reading them. I have nothing but admiration for her. It is a totally different language to her native language, and she has picked it up in a comparatively short time and has proved herself to be a natural linguist. So let's take a look at some of the language. Okay, so the person I'm going to talk about. So we often in English, when we're going to start to say something, start with okay because it makes the person start listening to you. She's one of my closest friends. We talk about close friends. These are people you are close to. I've tried to use various things in here just to get the range of grammar. So we've got I'm going to, we've known, we didn't actually become. So we've got present perfect, we've known, we didn't actually become, past simple. And then we were studying in high school just to get that grammatical range in there at the start to show the examiner that you know your grammar. So often people ask me, what should you do in the 1 minute? If you can note down some grammatical phrases, this will help you in terms of your grammar. So write down things like when I was studying in, when I was living in, and just to remind you to use them, because often when we're speaking, we forget about grammar. Anyway, so this is a useful little word to get you back to what you're supposed to be talking about. She wasn't into, very useful for saying she doesn't like, she wasn't into, she didn't like. To be into something means to like something. And very useful for this topic, a natural linguist. If you are a linguist, it means you speak other languages or you study languages. But if you say somebody is a natural linguist, they're good at learning languages. If you say they're not a natural linguist, they're not good at learning languages. I was the opposite, so I'm saying I was a natural linguist. Relatively easy, quite easy. To pick it up, we pick up languages. This means to acquire, to learn. To get into, if you get into something, you start to become interested in it, you get to know more about it. She quickly became addicted, obsessed. Little phrases like this are really useful for IELTS speaking, to be addicted to be obsessed with. To spark an interest in. So these two things, so I'm referring back now to the liking K-pop, to liking K-dramas. These two things IELTS examiners like referencing, referring back. Sparked an interest in. To spark an interest means to create an interest. And she was inspired to learn, another thing, to be addicted to be obsessed with, to be inspired to. She picked up the odd word. That just means a few words, the odd word. To put some effort into. I'm using a lot of words with prepositions, because if you can get those correct, then the IELTS examiner likes this. To be addicted to spark an interest in, to be interested in, to put some effort into. Exceedingly difficult. I'm trying in all the videos to avoid using very, because you need a greater lexical range. So very difficult, exceedingly difficult, extremely difficult, incredibly difficult. So make sure you know lots of words like this. I expected her to give up, to quit. I've used both of these in this paragraph to show again the lexical range. She mastered it really quickly. To master something means to become good at something. Loads of. Somebody asked me recently why I use loads of instead of lots of. It's a more informal word for lots of. I wouldn't recommend using it in IELTS writing, but it's fantastic for IELTS speaking. A textbook. This is a book that you buy that has information in it. Textbooks you use in school. The basics. Whatever you are learning, whether it's the piano, learning how to use a computer, learning how to cook, learning a language, the basics are the first things that you need to know. So it's not very much, but it's the basics. So if you're learning how to cook, it might be how to boil an egg. This is the basics. So the book helped her with the basics. Every spare minute, just meaning every minute that she was not doing anything else. She had her head in that book. To have your head in a book is like to be reading it a lot. You can describe a person, he always has his head in a book, and it means they're always reading. I'll be honest, I'll be perfectly honest. I use this a lot in IELTS speaking. I thought it was a fad, very useful word. And a fad is something you do for a short time and then give up. So I have a friend and he has lots of fads. He gets interested in cycling, so he buys a new bike, he buys all the equipment you need, he buys the clothes you need, and then after 3 weeks he's bored with it. And then he moves on to fishing. All of these things are just fads, things he likes for a short time. And I thought this with my friend, that I thought it was a fad. She would quickly get bored and quit. But she stuck at it. To stick at something means to continue doing it and not give up. She's fluent in Korean. So we use fluent, and I've explained it. It's when somebody can communicate. You don't know everything, but you're able to communicate in the language, and you know enough of the language to do things in that language and be able to explain yourself using other words if you don't know the exact word that you are trying to use. Subtitles. When you're watching TV programs, these are the words that come in when it's translated into your language or another language. When we're learning languages, we talk about expanding. This means increasing your vocabulary, to expand her vocabulary. She can understand the gist. The gist is what it's about. So, for example, when you read in the IELTS reading test, you read it very quickly, you understand the gist, you understand what it's about. Maybe you don't understand every word, but you understand the topic, the subject, the gist of it. I have nothing but admiration for her. This means I admire her so much. You can say things like, I have nothing but love for him. That means I just love him. There's nothing else but love. I have nothing but respect for her. I have nothing but admiration for her. So it's like saying that I have no negatives at all because I admire her for what she has done. Your native language, your first language, your mother tongue. She's picked it up, she's learnt it in a comparatively short time compared to other people, how long it takes them to learn the language, and she's proved herself to be a natural linguist. So important words for this topic: to pick it up, to master it, the basics, to understand the gist, to expand the vocabulary, to be a natural linguist, to be fluent. So there are a number of words that if you get this topic, try to remember those and write them down in your 1 minute preparation time. So now let's take a look at one part 3 question connected with this topic. Do you think English will be the most commonly used language in the world? Quite possibly. At the moment, the most commonly spoken language is Mandarin, with over 1 billion speakers. But I'm guessing that English is not that far behind. If you consider the figures for native and non-native speakers using English, then I imagine it is already the most spoken language. I hope we don't see a time when English replaces all languages, because having different languages makes the world a much more colourful and diverse place. So there are many questions when it's, do you think blah 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 this will happen? And a way to answer this, a good start for your answer, is quite possibly. So you're saying, yes, I think this possibly might happen. But often in English we just say, quite possibly. And then we give the reasons for it. So that Mandarin is currently the most spoken, because in the question it says the most commonly used, the most commonly spoken. But I'm guessing is a very useful phrase, English is not that far behind. So it means there are a lot of English speakers too. And then you need to explain why you don't want it to become the most commonly used language, and because the world is a more colourful and diverse place when we have lots of different languages. Diversity, that there are differences between countries and between peoples. So I'm only looking at one part 3 question at the moment, because I have a lot of part 2 topics to add onto the course, and I think it's very, very difficult to learn lots of part 3 answers. It's important to remember that your part 2 is probably the most important part of the test, because the IELTS examiner is deciding your grade during your part 2, and if your part 3 is rubbish, it's not going to affect your grade. If your part 3 is really good, your grade could go up, but generally the IELTS examiner bases a lot of your grade on your part 2, but yes, it can improve when you give great part 3 answers, but don't worry if your part 3 answers were horrendous, because it's not going to have a massive impact on the grade if you've done a fantastic part 2. Thank you very much for watching.